Welcome to Working Towards Our Purpose, a podcast that offers a different perspective on what a job can be. For everyone out there that's heard that voice in the back of their head asking for something more, it's time to listen to it. I'm your host, Gino, and join me as I interview people who have decided to work in their own purpose. Together, we will learn, become inspired, and hopefully find our own path towards working in our purpose. Welcome back to Working Towards Our Purpose. Today, I got a special episode for you. I interviewed my brother, who is a photographer and owner and founder of MC3 Photo. He just got back from a trip to Nepal that we really dive into and talk about all the lessons and things that he learned. And this episode's a little bit longer than normal. It's just over an hour, but we just had so much to talk to and really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really excited to get to share it with you all. Again, as a reminder, I am going on a short break in the month of April to line up some more amazing interviews with guests. And I'm working on a website and some other things behind the scenes to make the podcast even better. So I'll see you in about a month when the podcast returns, and I hope you enjoy this episode. So I don't know if you know, but almost a year ago today was when we recorded the first episode. It came out March 30th of last year, and it's almost a year since the last time we recorded. It was episode 8, came out March 30th of last year. And at that time, you had just quit your job. And why don't you fill us in a little bit on like what you've done in the year since then?
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy to think that was a year ago. Feels like forever ago. So yeah, I've been working on the photography business as we talked about in the last episode. Basically, it was a year of learning, a year of, experiencing so many different kinds of photography, meeting new people, just realizing that I knew so much less than I thought I did, right? I think that's kind of what I touched on last time, was wanting to learn and to try everything, right? Kind of like an exploratory year of taking on any photography job and just seeing if I liked it, seeing if I made money at it, seeing, the process. And I think at this point now, a year into it, I'm starting to narrow down what I'm focusing on and kind of starting to market myself in certain areas, right? Instead of just kind of putting myself out there as a photographer that will shoot anything. Like, that's not somewhere where you want to stay for too long, You have to niche down and get to some sort of, specialty area. And it doesn't have to stay that forever, you can kind of move around or whatever. But you have to kind of market yourself at, I am an engagement photographer, I am a headshot photographer, so that people know who you are. They can look at your portfolio of work, and that's how you can get clients. So I've been working on the portfolios of different categories. I've been shooting a bunch of my friends, just doing all kinds of random jobs. So yeah, that's kind of been the last year.
Did it go the way that you thought it would, or did it go differently? Like, in what ways did it feel different or unexpected? Because I know for me, it was definitely like I had a very naive thought process of like, oh, I could put more time to this, therefore I'll make more money, and I'll make this much money because I could put this much time to it. And that didn't happen at all. So for my first year, it was like a huge wake up call of like, oh, it's not just going to happen because you put time to it. Like, you have to figure out how to make things work.
Exactly that. Where I thought that, I could take decent pictures, work will come to me and I'll find it. And that's not really the case. Like, sure, there's friends and there's family who will refer you and you'll get some work through that, but it's not going to be enough work to keep you going. You do have to market yourself. You do have to go out there and meet people. And learning that, I think, was, like you said, a big wake up call that it's not going to be that easy. It's going to be really difficult. And a lot of times I'll explain to people, like, there's higher highs and there's lower lows, and getting through that is challenging. There's not just like your daily routine of going to the office and doing your normal thing. It's like you really have to kind of focus on yourself a lot and make sure that you're doing all right mentally. Because if you're not, you can't really focus on the business. It's like,
yeah. I just came across a quote recently, and it said, from some random guy on the internet. So, I mean, take it for what it's worth, but it said something, about like, it's the people that work on themselves are the people that are going to become, I don't like this word, but successful. And it's the people that work on their jobs that like won't be. And that was definitely a huge lesson that I've learned since I've left. Is just like working on yourself, whether it's, mental health or like new skills or like, figuring out what it is that you enjoy or not enjoy. That's definitely like the biggest benefit of it. And then also to touch on like the highs and lower lows, I also feel the exact same way. And I would still always take that versus just like even keel, because it's like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't experience the highs without the lows. So instead of just having like, you know, the flat line of just boringness for
Mhm.
all of your existence, I'd rather like have really shitty days and then really awesome days.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people will tell you, and I think even like it's like a Buddhist thing that you're supposed to just keep even, right? Don't get too high or too low. And so many people have told me that, and I kind of struggle to believe that. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's like you said, like I would rather experience something really awesome and then have something really bad, come after that. And it's like the seasons, right? It's like you don't want to live in 70 degrees all day long. You want the seasons so that you can appreciate the highs and the lows.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's personal preference. Some people definitely do like living in sun for all the time, but I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
For me, I found out that that's what's important to me. So I think like that's the biggest thing is figuring
Mhm.
out what's important to you and what makes you, enjoy the days that you have.
Mhm.
So yeah, just to keep going on like the last year and stuff, can you tell me like one like really good thing and then maybe like one really bad thing that comes to mind?
I think like there was a point in, I think it was like October last year where I had a bunch of inquiries come through and I was like starting to feel good about, getting work from outside of that network of friends and family that I described. And I wrote a couple proposals and then a couple people just like turned me down. They're like, no, that's too much money or whatever. And I remember like being really excited in the beginning of the month with like a bunch of leads. And then towards the end of the month, like none of them came through. And it was kind of defeating. And I think, looking back, it was a learning experience, right? Like you can't get emotionally tied to a client, like when they reach out to you and they like expect that that's going to go through, because some people just don't value it or they don't, want to spend that much money on it, or it is what it is. It's like some people don't know until they ask you. And, I think I learned through that process that I need to better describe what I'm providing to people, right? I'm not just taking pictures, I have to show them my process and I have to explain to them in detail what I'm doing, not because, and the reason of doing that is so that they can see what you're doing. And they're not going to know that because they're not a photographer. And I know that because that's what I do. So I have to show them like, this is what I'm doing to you. This is the value I'm providing. And it's more than just taking pictures for you, right? Like you could do that with a phone. So I think that was the important lesson from that time.
Yeah, totally. I had the exact same experience with what I was doing because at first I was just doing podcast editing. So I would just tell people like, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm just doing podcast editing. But I remember the story of a client that I had. She was my first, I think she was my second like real client. And we used to talk a lot about like our businesses because she was an entrepreneur also. And she said to me one time, when I was explaining to her what I do, she was like, "Oh, I had no idea that you like did that. I just thought you edited. I didn't know like you went through every single minute and listened to it and did this and mixed the music in and stuff like that." And it's like nobody knows what you're doing because
Mhm.
they don't have the same view that you do. Some of the stuff they won't care about, but like the parts that value or benefit them, that's what they care about. So you have to like use your words in a way that like describes to them the value that they're getting. And I guess that's kind of marketing 101, but that's one of the things that
Yeah.
like you never really
Right.
learn not going to school for marketing or whatever.
Exactly.
So yeah, no, that's cool. That's a good perspective of like the ups and the downs. But yeah, so the reason that I wanted to have you back again was a little bit for that recap, but then also because you just went on a really big trip.
Mhm.
You spent almost a month in Nepal, and I kind of just wanted to talk to you about that, how that experience was, the things you took from it, and things you learned from it. So, give us like a brief description of the trip that you just came back from.
Yeah, sure. So I guess that would be the high of that trip. So I came back about a month ago. So I was on a service trip with the Sierra Club, which is the country's oldest nature preservation organization, and they do these trips all over the world. And most of them are tourism based, just to get people in and kind of show them, maybe these areas that aren't as accessible to the normal person. And our trip was, like I said, it was service based. So we went to a remote area of Nepal and we helped rebuild some homes for people that lived in the village that were destroyed back in the earthquakes they had in 2015 that were really bad. And they're still recovering from it. So yeah, we spent a little bit of time in Kathmandu doing tourist stuff. And then we kind of took this long, like 2-day Jeep ride, 1-day trek out to the village. And then we stayed in the village for about a week, came back, did a little more sightseeing in Kathmandu, and then we came home. So it was 3 weeks total.
So, how did you like even get involved with the trip to begin with, or like what allowed you to think that like it was something that was obtainable?
Yeah. I guess I think back in high school is when it started, when I read Into Thin Air, which was about the 1996 Mount Everest trip that went poorly. The John Krakauer book, which is highly recommend if you haven't read it. But that got me interested in the mountain, and the mountain, is just its own thing where people obsess over, and it's, the tallest mountain in the world. And I think it got me really interested in the people and why people do this. And they have, Sherpa from the area. If they didn't have these people in Nepal helping them, they wouldn't be able to climb the mountain. And through that, I think that sparked the interest in the area and my, figuring out what Nepal even was as a country. And fast forward to when I moved to New York City, I moved to Jackson Heights, which is one of the biggest neighborhoods for Nepali and Tibetan people outside of Nepal. It's in a small concentration. So there's the food, there's the people, the culture, and I kind of got immersed into that. And that was kind of the next step. And I think the next step was me just kind of wanting to go there for some reason. I don't know why. I just felt like kind of drawn to it. And I remember, I think I watched some photographer I follow on YouTube, and he did the trek to Everest Base Camp. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize you could do that. That's really cool. Maybe that's something I could do. And kind of just bookshelf that, fast forward a couple of years. And I think I was just doing some research, and I found this trip through the Sierra Club's website. And it wasn't the Everest trek, the base camp trek, but it was the service-based trek. And that was kind of interested me a little bit more. I was like, okay, well, if I can go to this country and kind of give back to the community and go in a more sustainable way, that kind of sits a little bit better with me instead of just going on, kind of a selfish trip or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it sparked my interest even more. And at the time that I saw it, I was still working, my corporate job. So obviously I didn't have 4 weeks to take off and, go to Nepal by myself. So I think I told myself, if I leave that job and if they post it again next year, I'm going to go. So then fast forward again to that year, and I saw them post it, and I'm like, oh shit, now I gotta go. And I contemplated for 6 months and was like, nah, coming up with all these excuses of why I shouldn't have gone, why I didn't need to go. And I don't know, this is just like kind of a strange thing to do. Like, there's not a lot of people who understand it or support it. But I think like my wife and like a couple of close friends were really supportive of me and kind of gave me the push that I needed to do it. And so I signed up and I did it.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you could maybe talk a little bit more about the decision-making process, because I do remember like you going back and forth with it and like thinking about like, should I be doing this or should I not be doing this? Thinking about like your business and that sort of thing. What was like the thought process like?
Yeah. I mean, I think it felt kind of, I don't know, self-indulgent to do a trip like that. As I'm trying to make my business take off and get successful. And I would just look at all the failures, not the failures, but the down parts of the past year. And I'm like, well, I need to focus on that and get better. And I think I talked with another photographer who had been to Nepal and kind of shared similar interests with it. And I remember he was like laughing at me. And he's like, why don't you just go? And I was like, well, and I give him all these reasons, and he's just like shaking his head, and he's like, it's 3 weeks. He's like, is that really going to make a big difference in your business? 3 weeks, And I was like, yeah, I guess he's right, and just, I think hearing that from him, who was kind of an outsider a little bit, but had some perspective on it, and hearing him kind of think like, why even like contemplating that? Like, just do it. And then hearing from, like close friends, family, them also supporting me with it. It's like, okay, well, the people I care about the most are telling me to do this. I want to do this. So let me just do it.
Yeah. I think part of it too, I think you kind of alluded to, is the like almost the idea of like deserving of it, right? Like did your business do well enough that you could deserve a trip like this? And I don't know, it's interesting to think about it in that way. And I don't know if it holds as much value as like it does as it feels personally. Like, because I think a lot of decisions are kind of made like that. Like, do you think you deserve this? Oh, I shouldn't do this because I don't deserve it. And that's just kind of an interesting thought process to think about, because I think from your perspective, it could be like, well, I don't really deserve this. But from that other photographer's perspective, it's like, yeah, of course, like go on it. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff. You're going to have new experiences. Like, yeah, you should definitely go on it. Like, he doesn't think of it in that way, but you do.
Yeah.
Which makes you question like the validity of that thought.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a huge part of it, right? Is telling yourself you can go on this trip and do that. And I think part of it was just fear too, just being scared to do something like that. I've never done a trip that big by myself, that far away. That was a factor of it too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then even just to think about like the selfishness part of it too, like, because I'm sure that's a thought. I don't know if you specifically said that, but I'm sure that was a thought that went through your head. Like, am I being selfish going on?
For sure.
I think over the past year or so and into this year, my idea of like what selfish is has changed. And I think I used to think of that as like a negative thing, but now more so than ever, I don't think of it as a negative thing to be selfish. I think it's a positive thing to be selfish, because if you can do the things that you won't hold resentment for and you do the things that you want to be doing, then you could be better to the people that are around you. So I think that for me is like something that I've noticed, and I try to make decisions based off of like what I truly want to do. Because even in the short term, if it seems selfish or you tell somebody no, I think in the long term, you're better to the people that you are closest to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I had a specific conversation with my wife about it, saying that I felt selfish about doing this. And she like laughed and she's like, you're going to help people in another part of the world. Like, how's that selfish?
Yeah, that's a good point. And definitely like that's another piece of it too, is like having supportive people around you. I think that's definitely, a big piece of kind of showing you like that you are allowed to do certain things, and kind of gets rid of that negative talk.
Yeah, like you said, it takes that judgment of yourself and the voice in your own head, and it kind of removes that because they don't have that, right?
Right, exactly. So yeah, I guess let's talk about like what the beginnings of the trip were like, because I mean it's a huge flight, right? Like it takes forever to get there. What was it like getting there? And like, what is Nepal even like to somebody who like never been there? And I don't know what it's like. I think a lot of people have like stereotypes of maybe what it would be like, but what is it actually like?
Yeah, for sure. It was well, first it was a 25-hour commute, which actually wasn't as bad as I was expecting. I had a layover in Doha, Qatar, for like 8 hours or so. And then I arrived in Kathmandu at 9 a.m. their time. I don't even know what the local time in New York was at that point. But I felt good. I was ready to go. I got some sleep on the plane. And I had gotten there a day before everyone else did. Not everybody, but the day before the group trip started. So I met a few, the guides were already there. I met a few people. And I kind of had some time to myself. And I remember like being very excited and ready to go getting there. And then as the day went on, like I was trying to do this sound bath thing that was supposed to be there, and I like couldn't find it. And I was getting kind of aggravated at that. And then my throat started to bother me a little bit. And I thought it was just like the dust and the pollution and whatnot, but I ended up actually getting sick on the first night. So it actually started off kind of rough, but it didn't really affect my trip at all. Like I feel like it was kind of almost nice in a way, because I ended up having to miss the first day of the sightseeing in Kathmandu. But I think like starting at such a low, like it only went up from there. It was like, it didn't even bother me really at all now, like looking back. But at the time I was thinking like, what am I doing? I'm halfway across the world. I'm sick now, sitting in my hotel room by myself, like just contemplating like this was a dumb decision. Everyone was right. It was telling me like not to do this, right? Mm-hmm. So the fear creeping back up again. So yeah, that was getting there and the start of the trip. I was able to do the second day of sightseeing in Kathmandu, and Kathmandu is just chaos is the first word that comes to mind. It is, it's very polluted, unfortunately, from industry and the surrounding area. It's a valley, so all the haze and pollution kind of sits there. And I think I was told at the time of year we were there, they were also burning all the crop fields in India. So all that pollution is kind of wafting over. So it's very hazy. We landed and it's just haze. Just you can't see very far. Sun's out. It's not cloudy, but it's just hazy. And we got picked up from the airport, drove to the hotel, and I just remember sitting in the Jeep thing that we were in and just watching out the window at this chaos. And I was like, this is so cool, just people, animals, cars, all in the street. There's no sidewalks. There's no lines. There's no street signs. It's just like, this chaos, happening. It's very dusty. I have an appreciation now for the street sweepers in New York that I always used to make fun of. But I guess they make a difference because it's so dusty there. It's like a lot of people are wearing masks just to not breathe in the dust. Not for COVID, but just not to breathe in the dust, The wires are just hanging everywhere. These communication wires and poles. And I mean, you still see damage from the earthquakes in 2015. Buildings are collapsed still and never been rebuilt. Yeah, it was kind of shocking, I think, culturally I was expecting, I guess I didn't have too much expectations, but I knew it was going to be different from anything I'd ever seen, but it was very different.
Mm.
And it was kind of overwhelming at first. Once I got out of the Jeep and I was immersed in that, I was definitely, scared I was going to get hit by a car or a moped or whatever. But you get used to it, and you learn that it's, although it seems like it's crazy and people are going to run you over, it's like everybody's paying attention. Everybody's kind of, you can walk in front of a car and the car's going to see you and it's going to stop, even though it seems like it might not, because that's not how we operate here. It's just different.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine it's kind of a similar experience for somebody who's never been to New York City before, and then they go to New York City
Sure.
and they're like, holy crap, there's cars everywhere. I'm going to get killed.
Yeah, that's true.
So that perspective coming from somebody who lives in the city to Kathmandu, I imagine like if you come from rural, Idaho, and then you go to Kathmandu, it's probably like insane.
Yeah, for sure. And it's super crowded too. It's a big city, but there's parts of it that are pretty westernized. Like you go to a coffee shop and it's like this coffee shop could be in America, Europe. It's, there's parts of that, but then there's also parts of it that are nothing like that. It's all kind of mixed together, and it's a country that's developing very quickly, and they're trying to, get on par with some of the other countries in the world. And so you do see like the younger people who want that influence, and they're trying to kind of build these kinds of things that are, like you see in the West.
So what was the difference between like Kathmandu and then the village that you went to? Because you spent a couple of days in Kathmandu and then went out to this remote village.
Yeah. So we hopped in the Jeeps and we drove all day. And the first, 2-3 hours of it was sitting in traffic in Kathmandu trying to get out of the city. But once you get out of the city, it's just, I don't know, it was so cool to just kind of stare out the window at the landscape. It was kind of similar. I mean, you're familiar with the trip my wife and I did for our honeymoon. We took the train cross country. And just staring out of the window, and it's just so entertaining. It's like, you think that sounds boring, but it's really not. And it was kind of a similar feel that I had of just staring at the landscapes of everything we drove by. And it's just these, after you get out of Kathmandu, it's very, very hilly, but it's not what you would think. People probably think of the Himalayas and they think of snow-capped mountains and sharp granite, rocks everywhere. And that is there, but where we were kind of driving south east, and it's just not rolling hills because they're tall. We probably went up to 8,000-9,000 feet and down to rivers, kind of going up and down, crossing these mountains, which are the foothills of the Himalayas basically. But it was very subtropical almost. Like there's banana trees, there's lots of birds, there's it was warm. It was like 70 degrees, it was beautiful. It was these rivers we would cross draining from Mount Everest, and it was just unbelievably beautiful. It was so amazing to just stare at, it was really, really cool. So we did that for 2 days, and then we got out and we trekked for 8 or 9 hours on the third day, which was really, really fun. We camped in tents in a village where the Jeeps dropped us off, and the next day we hiked. And quickly into the hike, we kind of came around a mountain. And when I say mountains, I'm talking about the Green Mountains. Those are the ones that we were hiking through. There was no snow. It wasn't really that cold. But we came around a mountain, and then all of a sudden there was like 4 or 5 peaks from the Himalayas, the high peaks in front of us. And I just remember like, it was very surreal. It was like, wow, like that's the Himalayas, and it's hard to even translate on pictures or talking about it. It was just really, really cool. I just like was overcome with emotion and was like, this is so amazing. Like that's the mountains that I read about in high school. Like that was it right in front of me. And it wasn't Mount Everest, but it was, I think Mira was one of the mountains. But it was just seeing that, like still covered in snow while we're standing in like 70-degree weather. Like it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely a certain energy about different like areas, and I definitely have some sort of like maybe similar connection to like being out in Death Valley and just like seeing the mountains and just feeling like a certain energy that's like coming or radiating from the earth or whatever it is. And I think people are drawn to like specific areas, and it's almost interesting like knowing that like you read about it in high school and like you've had this like affection for it for so long, and then being able to see it like, because with Death Valley I knew nothing about it, but then I got there and I was like, whoa, this place has like something special about it. So it's cool to like almost have all that anticipation and then to see it in real life. But yeah, certainly understand like the frustration of not being able to like translate that to anybody.
Yeah, it's hard, but
especially as a photographer, like you take a picture and you're like, well, that doesn't really describe it very well.
Yeah, it's a 2-dimensional representation of it, right? So it's it's one of those things you have to experience. And like you said, the energy you feel from it, it's not something you can translate either. I remember like getting in the Jeeps. I was still recovering from this cold I had, right? And I was like timid of it and kind of like a little bit nervous and still questioning like what the hell I was doing. And that very quickly turned around when we started driving out to the landscapes, and I just started to get immersed into it. And I was like, it very quickly went from that feeling to just feeling like this is really cool. This is amazing.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, it makes you almost think like, I mean, I'm somebody who thinks that like things happen for a reason and there's not really, a bad thing that happens. I think because in the moment that seems like a bad thing, you got sick, right? But it almost kind of shows you like the dichotomy of like the fear versus like the reward, and then maybe like just blowing past that and being like, yeah, that was just an irrelevant thing that I was thinking about. Like there was totally a reason why I came here and like why this whole thing happened the way that it did.
That's exactly the feeling I had in the Jeep the first day, and even on the trek we were walking out there. I was just thinking like, just laughing at myself, like what was I scared of? Like why? Like even pre getting sick and all that, and like being at home and like having reservations about doing it. I just remember laughing, being like, what was I scared of? This is amazing. There's nothing to be scared of here. Like, I think that was like one of the lessons I learned was like, you can either, in anything, you can either choose to listen to the fear and limit yourself, or you can just choose to push ahead and see what happens, right? Like at the end of the day, I know it's easier said than done, right? But if you can choose to just push through that, so many amazing things can happen.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think that's just a representation of kind of like also the paths that we've chosen. Like it was certainly very scared to leave corporate and to leave a steady paycheck, and to, that's something that's not like comfortable to do. But then after doing it, it's like, well, I could have done that a long time ago. Like I'll figure it out. Like maybe it's not all figured out yet, but like the rewards are so much more past like, anything else that like it almost seems silly at that point. But yeah, I think that's like a kind of a common theme with these certain things.
For sure.
So then you took this trek and you took the Jeep tour to a village, and then you hiked for 8 hours to the village that you were supposed to be helping. What was that like when you like got there? What was the reception of the people in the community?
Yeah. So just to give a description of the village, it was basically this hillside on one of these mountains, these green mountains I was describing. River at the bottom. At the top, there was a natural spring providing water to the neighborhood. And it's just, you can't take 2 steps without being on a hill. Nothing is flat. Nothing at all was flat. I mean, this was the story from Kathmandu all the way out to this village. And there's just homes kind of built throughout this hillside, all the way from the bottom, all the way up to the top. Terraced landscapes everywhere, growing crops, cattle, goats, chickens, all kinds of stuff. And we walked in, and, for us, it was such a journey to get out there. So to us, it was like, wow, we're finally made it here, and get to see what it looks like. But the reception from them was kind of overwhelming. Like we walked in and people kind of like knew who we were a bit. So this was the 4th year they have done this exact trip. And they kind of knew who we were. They were expecting us. So when we showed up, they wwere very like happy. They kind of came out of their homes. I remember the kids came out of the school and like were clapping and stuff. It was like too much almost. It was like, they were making a big deal about it, but it was kind of nice to see that they were happy that we were there. Cause I mean, we didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I had some conversations with people in the group, and we kind of, you could look at it as, we're these, Westerners coming in and helping out and for a week and, making ourselves look good. And maybe it's not really about helping them, but it's just about, that's like white savior kind of stuff, So we didn't know if they were going to take to us well, or if they were going to, maybe not care for us so much. Just so I was kind of treading lightly, you know what I mean? But I think that thought was coming from like us coming from the West and thinking that we're better off than they are, right? And they were going to maybe be, feel a certain way towards us. But I think as we went on, I realized that was a weird way to think about it, right? Like, why would we be better than them? They're living their lives. They have everything they need. They're happy. Some could say better than us, right? Like they're living a different way, but they're still living their lives, and they still have everything they need, and just like us. So we're not living better than them, right? They're just living their lives in a different way. So I think once I thought about it in that way, I was able to more kind of see how maybe they thought about us. And And the whole time we were there, I felt nothing but just this, overwhelming, just welcoming of us, and just they shared everything with us. As you're walking, we had a campsite where all the tents were set up, and then the two homes were maybe a 15, 20-minute walk away from there. So you'd have to walk through people's homes. You'd have to walk through people's gardens to get there. There's no real roads or anything. It's just walking paths. And no one cared. They invited us into their homes. They gave us tea. You'd walk by them. Everybody would namaste. They would say hi to you. And everybody was so sweet and just so kind. And they didn't judge us at all, it felt like. They were just, oh, you're here in our village. Now you're part of us. That's kind of how it felt.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to think of it in a way that's like, I guess something that you can maybe only think about like after experiencing it. But like, yeah, if you are thinking of it like, oh, I'm coming to like help you do something because I'm better off than you, like that sort of thought process is flawed in and of itself, because there's a hierarchy in that thinking, right? That you're better than these people because they don't have the next iPhone or whatever cars. Right. And that's like an interesting thing to, I guess, probably experience going on, like, because it's almost like you have to change your thought process once you're there. You're like, oh, I was being naive by thinking that. And learning that lesson, I think, also takes a little bit of ego degradation, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, and I know like one of your big words is curiosity, and that's kind of what I felt from them too, is they were just curious. They were just like, oh, these people are different. I want to see what's going on. These little kids would come over and they would like come into our tent, into our tents, but they would come over to where we were sitting around our tents, and they would just be looking at us. They'd be looking in the tents. They were just curious, That's all it was. And I remember, so we worked for 4 days. We had a day off. There was a day off in the middle, and the guides went on another hike for the day. But I decided to sit back in the village because I wanted to have some more time to spend in the village, because we were working most of the day doing manual labor and stuff. So I didn't have time to explore, take pictures, and meet the people. So I didn't go on that hike, and I spent that day in the village. And I hiked all the way down to the river, and I was eating my lunch on a rock, and I see this guy coming over to me, and he's got this huge machete, right? And I think of myself here, and I would have been scared, right? But I wasn't scared at all. I knew he wasn't going to do it. Like, he was curious, right? So he comes over and he's looking at me, and he walks over and he comes over and he sits next to me, and we spent like a half an hour together, and all we can actually say to each other was our names, but we kind of just shared this moment, and it was amazing. Like, I'd never experienced that before. We kind of just sat there, and we tried to talk to each other, and as much as we could, but we kind of just sat in silence and just enjoyed each other's company, and it was really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's kind of like any situation where like you can't communicate with somebody verbally. It's like that's only a kind of small piece of it. Like like body language and energy fields are like such a bigger part of it. And it's like it's cool to be able to like receive that from someone who you don't know and can't communicate with, but still can positively interact with. Like and especially just like sitting in silence too, I think is, I don't know, it's easy to be like, that's awkward. I don't want to, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. But just to like accept it and accept whatever he can send to you energy wise, and you can send back and forth. And that's kind of a interesting thing, because I was going to ask about like the language barrier and like, did anybody speak English, or like what was were you able to communicate at all?
So yes, in Kathmandu, most everybody speaks English. Like even signs and stuff are in English. It's pretty prevalent. So they had a civil war in I think 2001, and they kind of overthrew the parliament and kings or whoever were ruling the country. And for a long time, they discouraged literacy, and they didn't teach people how to read. And after that revolution happened, they've really, I think the literacy rate went from some dismal number, and now it's like 95%. Like it's really good right now. And they teach every student English and Nepali. So all the young people know how to speak English very well. The older people, not so much. In the village, not so much. But they are teaching all the kids now in that village English. So most times it was not an issue. But there were, like, for instance, he didn't speak. He was probably, it's tough to tell. They all look so young. It's tough to tell people's age. But he was probably in his 30s, maybe 40s. He knew how to say "my name is," and that was about it. So, yeah.
What was the, like, get back to photography and stuff? You said you stayed back that one day to kind of like take pictures. I saw some of the pictures that you posted on Instagram, and like some of the best ones were pictures of people, and I'm imagining the people that were in the village. What was the reception to like their picture being taken? Because I know like even in America, like people hate getting their picture taken. They think it's like a privacy violation or whatever. What was their reception, especially to the people that you couldn't even really communicate with?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's difficult. It's difficult to you have to ask a lot of times. So that like the way of taking pictures of people I see is there's two ways you can do it. You can either take their picture without them knowing, which is more of like a street photography kind of thing where you don't want them to know you're taking the picture because then it kind of ruins the moment a little bit. Or there's, kind of portraiture type stuff where they know you're taking the picture and you're kind of making them feel good. You're having a conversation with them beforehand. And then you take their picture once you've built a little rapport with them. And that's kind of what I was doing. I wasn't really taking their pictures without them knowing. I mean, maybe I could have, but it didn't really feel right. So I would go up to somebody and I would try and talk to them a little bit. And I would kind of point to my camera and be like, is it okay? Like, thumbs up. Is it okay if I take a picture? And some of them said no. Some of them didn't want them. Like, I remember there was this older lady and she had this like really beautiful dress on and just this nice jewelry and stuff. And she looked really cool. I want to take a picture of her. And she said no, she didn't want me to take her picture. So I respect that. And I wish her well and I move on, The kids were easier because they were more just curious about what the camera was. And and showing them the pictures too is really, really helpful. So you take a picture of them and then you show the back of the camera to them and they see it and they start laughing and talking to their friends and stuff. And kids were much easier than adults. But there were some adults that let me take their picture. And yeah, it was, you kind of have to, that's the way I did it. You just have a conversation with them first.
I'm also curious to like understand their sort of way of living as much as you can like describe or how much you even like, took in the short period of time that you were there. But like, I'm curious as to like how community is there. I imagine it would be like more tight knit and that sort of thing. But what did like community look like, or like what was your sense of it?
In the village, it was everything. Everybody knew each other. Everybody, like I said, they had their own house and I guess private property in a sense, but it wasn't like they all shared the land. They were just such a tight knit community. Like you'd see groups of people talking or, walking by each other and talking to each other. And I think the coolest part of it was seeing how, community was a huge part, but seeing how self-reliant that community was. They didn't need anything from anywhere. They made their own food. They made their own houses. They grew their own crops and they did everything on their own. They fixed things, the water system, everything they had was built by them. They were just totally self-sufficient as a community. And I remember seeing that and being like, wow, everybody in the West is so reliant on other people, right? You can't, you get your food delivered to you, you have your car fixed by somebody. Like everything is just, you need so many other people to just get through your normal day, right? And they don't, like they're just totally disconnected from it and they run everything on their own. And I thought that was really cool that they knew how to do everything.
Yeah. Was there any sort of like indications of like these people were in charge of farming, these people were in charge of like more manual labor, sort of like maintenance or house building or something like that? Was there like subsections of like parts of the community? And also like how big was the village in general? Like how many people?
Sure. It was about, I'd say between like 150 and 200 people. The school had, I'm trying to remember now, I think it was like 200 and something people, but there were people from other villages too that went to that school. I think there was like maybe 100, 120 homes. I'm sure there was some sort of, I didn't really get an insight into that as much. You would walk by and you would see some farmland and then you walk by and you'd see some water buffalo or whatever and chickens and where the farming was, but it was kind of all mixed in really well. And I don't know if some people would provide certain things for other people or if everyone kind of had their own animals. I'm not exactly sure on the details of that.
What about like money? Like was there any sort of like money exchange or conversion? Was there stores that people bought stuff in, or was it all kind of just like where the farmers, here's all the food?
Yeah. No, there were stores. I mean, in the sense where you could go and buy something. There's maybe one or two of them. And they had like snack foods and sodas and beer and stuff like that. It wasn't things that you needed. It was more like things that were nice to have. Because I remember one day after work, we were wondering if there was a place to get a beer, and we had, one of our guides asked one of the local people and they're like, oh, go in there. And it looked like a home we walk in and there's a bed in the back behind the counter and there's a TV and some kids playing video games on the TV and there was like a little bench out front. We just bought like these dusty beers and drank them, and it was like essentially a bar, but it was a convenience store as well. And they use a Nepali rupee, and they take money, but I don't think that a lot of the people need that. I'm not entirely sure how it works. I mean, a lot of the people in the village would get jobs elsewhere. A lot of them were into trekking because it's huge. So people come from all over the world to go trekking, and they all have guides, and those are good jobs to get. Carrying things through the mountains is another job that people had. But so a lot of times maybe they would go outside, get a job, make some money, come back to the village. But I don't think that you needed tons of money to really live a life there.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially coming from like a place like America where everything revolves around money. And that's like the first conversation of anything. It's like, well, how much money are you getting paid? How much money is it? What does it cost? Like,
right.
to kind of like remove that from the hierarchy of needs almost is like kind of interesting to think about. Like, I don't know. It's definitely a completely new way of living that I don't think I could completely wrap my head around. But since leaving corporate, I've definitely devalued money way more than I did back then. So it's interesting to almost kind of like keep following it, even more so to the fact of like, not even really needing it as much, or they're, maybe in a completely different way than we see it here.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not like a capitalistic society whatsoever. It's more of just kind of how things used to be, where, hundreds of years ago, and it was trade and barter and there was money to an extent, but it was just not heavily used like it is now.
Yeah.
I think it was more similar to that.
Yeah. And I think that, especially like for me being a part of farmers markets and kind of seeing that moneyless economy where like at the end of a farmer's market, you trade stuff, and like I trade my bagels for some vegetables or like or some mushrooms. It's like, it's an interesting way to live, and it definitely feels a lot nicer than like going and like buying something at the store. Like when I know that like my friends who own the farm grew the food that I'm going to eat, like that to me is like way more meaningful and impactful than like going to Stop and Shop and buying carrots. Like it's something, there's definitely something to, and I always reference this book, The Celestine Prophecy, but they talk about it in there. But like the care that you put into the things that you're eating can significantly change like how it affects you. So it just makes you think of like, if there's a whole community of that, all the food they eat is grown by the people that they love. Like, how does that affect your health long term?
100%. Yeah. I mean, one of the guys' houses we were working on, Manju is his name. He was a really, really sweet guy. And he was kind of telling us about it a little bit. He's like, everything here is all organically grown. We don't have chemicals. We don't have pesticides. He's like, that's what we eat. We eat the food that we grow. And actually one of the days we were there, someone in the village had passed away, and they were 95. So it gives you a little sense of they do live pretty long. And it's almost like they I think it was a conch shell they blew in the morning to kind of indicate the death of somebody in the village. And it affects everybody. Like everybody knew what it was and kind of paid their respects for that. And then another night, a house caught on fire in the middle of the night. And the same thing, like one of our guides, our head guide, actually went over and like helped them. He walked over to it in the middle of the night and helped them. I guess everybody was okay. I didn't really get filled in on any of the details, but it's just like he didn't even think about it. He just woke up and he saw it and he went over and he helped out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No like fire department to call. It's just like everybody kind of sees that there's a problem and then goes and attends to it. That's really cool. So can you tell us a little bit too more about like that specific work that you were doing there? You said that you were going to help rebuild houses. What did that look like? Were you able to like build a whole house in a week? Like what was that like?
Yeah. So I didn't know showing up what it was going to look like. All I knew was we were going to rebuild these homes in a way that would have some reinforced steel and concrete so that if there was when there's another earthquake, they're not going to come crumbling down. And we got there, and the two sites we were working on were already started. The foundations were kind of dug out. All the stones from the previous house were kind of sitting on the side, ready to be used again. Some of the rebar was already in place. And for the first couple of days, we broke rocks, actually. We just smashed rocks into smaller pieces to use for the concrete, right? Because you need rocks to make concrete, and you can buy them or you can make them, right? So it was actually a good group activity because there was 5 of us at each site at once. And we actually got a bunch of rocks broken up, which saved them from having to buy them, right? And the head guide, Steve was his name. He was pretty funny. He used to work in a jail, And I remember one day he was like, man, if my inmates could have seen me now. But it was fun because we got to talk to each other and have good conversation while we were doing this. And yeah, that part was nice. We also moved the rocks too, which felt a little more useful because we would form a line and we would carry these heavy rocks distances. So that felt like we were being of use a little bit more. And then we also helped pour the concrete. So they would mix the concrete up on the ground. They would put it in these kind of tray things. And again, we would form a line and kind of, bring it over and pour it into place. And I think that was my favorite day because I could see the progress we made. Like we poured a whole slab of concrete in one day and it felt like we actually did help here, right? And it wasn't just us working there. They had the local people who were doing the job as well, who were working, and we were just kind of working in addition to them. So we're kind of giving them a kickstart to this home building process, right? When we left, the homes were not done, not even close to being done. But we helped kickstart it and get it off on, a stronger foot. And they told us another 5-6 weeks worth of work would complete the homes.
So whose homes were they and where were the people that used to live in there?
Yeah, so Manju, the guy I referenced earlier, one of them was his home. The other thing, people may ask like, well, the earthquakes were in 2015. Why are you still rebuilding? And it didn't necessarily level all the homes. So Manju's home had damage to it. There's a big crack on the wall. And over time, the crack got worse and worse. And eventually it was unstable. He couldn't live in it anymore. So he was living in some friend's house temporarily, while his home was going to get built. And he actually worked for the trekking company that we were with. And he was the main guide last year on the trip. And he actually got in a motorcycle accident in Kathmandu and hurt his knee. So he couldn't do it this year. So we had a different guy. But he was one of the recipients. Another guy, we didn't really meet as much. He didn't know English as well. He was just a guy in the village that they deemed needed it. They just kind of look at everybody's homes, and the two people that need it the most are the ones that get the homes.
So is this like an ongoing thing that like the Sierra Club will be back next year and keep doing it?
So they think next year is going to be the last trip. And the reason, I guess I should explain, the reason we're connected with this village was because of the trekking company, Crystal Mountain Trekking. They started in that village, and a lot of the people lived in that village who worked there. And the assistant guide, Cheryl, has been doing treks in Nepal, guiding them since 1992. And she, got to get really close to all these people because every year she would come and do a trek and she would meet them and come back and see them again. And she had just this deep connection with these people. And after the earthquakes, they kind of just posed the question, said, hey, would you guys be interested in doing a trip like this in the village? And they were like, yeah, definitely. So from then they started planning it and doing all the things. And yeah, that's how it got started.
That's pretty cool. So basically like one person wanting to help some people that she felt connected to.
Yeah. That was another one of the coolest things, was just seeing her connection to this country, to these people, and how much they respected her. They called her Didi, which is like older sister. And they were just so kind and grateful for her. Like she has made such a change and, such a positive influence on all these people. And same to her, like they've made such a positive influence on her and changed her life in such a beneficial way. It was just this reciprocity to witness was amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, so I mean, there's probably many more questions I can ask, but kind of coming to the end of our time, but there's still some more things I want to ask. So I kind of prepared these quote unquote rapid fire questions that maybe you could try to like answer as succinctly as possible.
Sure.
But just some other things that like I'm curious about that don't really have any like order or anything like that. First one would be, did you bring any cool music back? Did you get like any music? Because usually like when I travel, I like to like find the music of the area.
Absolutely.
Nice.
The first night in the village, we went to sleep in our tents, right? And I don't know how much of this was real life and how much of this was a dream, but I remember just falling asleep to this droning music of drums and just this rhythm, and not so much lyrically or vocally, but it was just this amazing music that was just, it was like 10, 12, 15-minute songs that you thought transitioned to another song, but then it would come back, and it was this really, really cool music. And I don't necessarily I didn't really grab any of that stuff. It's just traditional Nepali music.
Were they like playing it, or were they?
Yeah, like someone's home is just playing the music, and you can softly hear it throughout the whole valley. But we actually did grab a song. One of the days we were working, I remember it was the day we were pouring the concrete, and this song was playing while we were taking a break, and then we passed out all the concrete, the whole pile of concrete, and we came back and it was still playing. And then someone in the group did the Shazam or whatever and got the song. So we were able to find it on Spotify afterwards. And
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
and it's such a good song. Yeah. Maybe link it if you want, but it's pretty good.
Do you have like a playlist or something you started?
I should. Yeah, I should. I kind of did, but there's only a couple songs on it. But also one of the guys in the trekking company with us, one of our guides, he wrote a song about all the village. And they tried to explain it to us and what it meant, but it was basically like how the village meant so much to all of them and the ups and downs of life and that kind of thing. And he has it on YouTube and there's like 150,000 views of it or something like that. Wow. So yeah, we have that as well.
That's interesting.
Which is pretty cool. And I guess he wrote the lyrics to it and it's the only song he ever wrote and he wants to write another one. And yeah, it's cool that music is such a big piece of the culture as well. Like, a lot of people played music or sang. They dance is a really big part of it too. They have this really unique dance that all of them know, and it was really cool.
That's really interesting. All right, next question. Give me a food memory.
Food memory. Well, so it's funny because when I lived in Jackson Heights, I was exposed to Nepali food pretty well. So I had a lot of the traditional dishes, the momos, obviously, or the Tibetan dumplings. And having it over there and kind of seeing that it was pretty similar to what it was in Jackson Heights was like, oh, okay, there's some authenticity to the food in Jackson Heights. Like, it wasn't like I was experiencing it for the first time, but I was experiencing it and it tasted very similar to how it was in New York. So that was kind of cool.
What about thoughts on like long-term travel now?
As far as just taking trips?
Like wanting to do it more or like...
Yeah. Well, it definitely removed any fear barrier from it. It's like, I think a lot of times you may have these perceptions of places or things that you've never done before. And I think that's totally removed. Like I want to go to different places and experience this again. And I think just going to smaller cultures and villages like that, I think you just learn so much just by being there. And it's just really, really a privilege to be immersed in that. And I absolutely would love to do that again if I had the opportunity.
So you would go back?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I was asking Cheryl about the first time she went to Nepal, and I think it was like 86 or something like that, she said. And she said it was a bad trip. Like she had a horrible time. Everything went wrong, could have went wrong. And she went home and like 6 months later, a year later, she kept thinking about it. And she's like, man, I need to go back and do it right. And now to see how immersed she is with this country. It's like, it's kind of funny. It's almost, she even said in her own words, like it kind of drew me back, and I kind of wonder how that's going to be for me. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like we're saying earlier about like certain places, like when I first went to Death Valley, I saw like a couple other national parks too, on like this road trip, but Death Valley is the only place that I've been back to multiple times now. And I keep like thinking like, when's the next time I'm going to go back there?
Yeah, for sure.
And then like we went on that trip back there. So yeah, it's interesting how like different places kind of affect you and pull you in. And then, so another rapid fire question, what does your focus feel like now coming back, like thinking about how the trip affected business and like thinking of like levels of importance? Like, has that changed from the trip?
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely added some perspective. It gave me some room to breathe and kind of look back on it. And it gave me a break from it as well. I mean, like working for yourself, it's like it never shuts off. And I think that was like a nice time to shut off and just not think about it as much. So coming back to it with fresh eyes and a clear head, it's definitely been beneficial. It's kind of like, when you walk away from a problem, you come back to it and you're like, oh, that was simple. Why was I struggling with that? It's almost a little bit of that in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Were there any things that you took like culturally away from it? Because like everybody's culture is different, but were there any like certain pieces of their culture that you'll take back?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just think that so many people here are just kind of racing around, trying to get as much done, trying to be productive, trying to do their side hustles and all these things at once. And I just think that doesn't really exist over there. It's everyone's more focused on themselves and not themselves, but like the well-being of themselves, right? And it's just like it's commerce and it's making money over here and it's trying to just be successful or whatever that means. And over there, it's just that doesn't exist. It's just people are more concerned with their well-being and And I touched on it earlier that they all look so youthful too. They just look wise too, right? Like no one's looks jumpy or I don't know, like anxiety probably doesn't exist as much over there, right? Like that is an important thing in their culture that is not really well represented in our culture.
Yeah, that's a good thing to touch on. I literally just had a similar thought that I had my Substack last week talk about, because I kept like running into these Mondays where I was just like overwhelmed with how many things that I wanted to do, being productive, being mad at myself for not being productive, and basically just being like frozen all day long and not getting anything done. And that was happening again. And then I decided to like ask myself, like keep asking why, like I felt like this. And then I got to the point where I was like, why am I putting so much value on being productive?
Yeah.
Like why is that important?
Right.
Why is it important that I'm productive right now? What if I'm not productive? Is that okay? Like maybe it is.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was like such an interesting conversation that I had with myself almost. But yeah, that's just like something that your brain's always telling you that you need to be productive or you need to be successful or whatever that means. So that's kind of interesting that you bring that up. And then last question would be one memory that you didn't, or story or memory that you didn't get a chance to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So this one definitely comes to mind first. That night that I was sick, they all went out to dinner to some restaurant, and I sat back at the hotel because I didn't want to be around them and spread anything, and I also wasn't feeling good. So I just went to the hotel kitchen, and there was really nobody there. I just got some soup, and I was sitting there, and one of the guys from the hotel who worked at the front desk came over to have his dinner at the same time, and he sat at the table with me, and he started talking to me, and he was really cool. He must have seen, he knew I was sick and the deal, I was on the trip and all that, and he started talking to me, and he's like, he's like, do you meditate? And I was like, well, I've been struggling to make it a habit and get into it, but I like to do it and I want to get better at it. And he's like, meditation is very important. And he says, if you can control your mind, you can do anything. And if you don't control your mind, it'll control you. And he tells me how he gets up at 3:00 every morning and he meditates for hours and hours. He goes home after work and he meditates again. And just how big of a part of his life it is. And in the whole culture, really. I mean, it's just a big part of Buddhism as well. I mean, there's a lot of Buddhists over there, but it's just such a big part. It's almost like a normal part of everybody's life. Like everybody kind of puts some importance to that. And I think that it shows how important it is, right? Like he probably saw me like worrying about everything, and he kind of came over and was like, relax, like don't worry about it. Like he saw the energy coming off me. I was like, worried about the trip going wrong and stuff, and he was, it was kind of reassuring and nice to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, that is interesting. It makes me think of the podcast I did a little bit ago about the person I was interviewing. He has a mushroom farm, and like he was talking about how meditation basically like changed his life and changed the way that he thinks about things, or like what he finds important. And like I think it is important, and even go back to like the selfishness of it, like spending enough time with yourself to figure out what you need to do, because I think we all have the answers inside of us. Like we all know what we need to do. It's just a matter of like getting rid of all the bullshit and like figuring out like this next actual step, and like actually listening to yourself and listening to your intuition and like that sort of thing. And the more that you can do that, I think, I don't know, at least for me, the more happiness or joy that I've found. So I think that meditation is a part of that. And even just like time with yourself, like it doesn't have to look like, sitting with your legs crossed. It could just be like spending time with yourself with no distractions and seeing what comes up. And that's kind of a cool synchronicity of something like him seeing you struggling and then being like, relax, bud, you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's basically what I got out of it afterwards.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So that was the end of the rapid fire questions. Also want to give you a chance to like talk about like the prints that you have, because I know you have a print shop that people can buy prints of, and you added some from this past trip. So yeah, like how can people support you, or talk about the things that you want to be doing in maybe this next year as a photographer?
Yeah, I think, I do have a print shop up on my website. It's mc3photography.com. There's a link there.
Link that.
Yeah, to my print shop. And I did add 5 or 6 photos from Nepal on there. Some film photos too, if anyone's interested in that. I took the film camera with me, and that was really cool experience too, getting into that. So for this year, I guess personal project wise, for me, I want to get more into the art side of it and figure out how to get my work displayed and seen by others, and the whole gallery scene. How do I start to begin understand that and to get into that. And that's one of my goals for this year. So, and then I also have a newsletter on Substack that I started using recently. I know you have one as well. So it's a nice way to kind of have a newsletter and also have a home for it to live and not just kind of die in the inbox, So I've been focusing on showing more of my personal projects to clients as well to just keep people interested. If you come and get a headshot done, you may not need one for a while, right? But I can still kind of have a relationship with somebody or a past client or a prospective client and show them what I'm working on my personal projects to just, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, Substack's been a great platform, I think, because I got it because you showed it to me. And I've kind of almost leaned into just using it to like just explore thoughts or like different things that like I'm thinking of or going through, like kind of just like putting some attention to certain thoughts that come up or something that I read in a book and like not necessarily relating it back to like business or anything like that, but it's cool to just like think of, I don't know. For me, it's more like the lifestyle conversations or something, So yeah, that's a cool thing. I'll definitely link your Substack too.
Yeah. And then just having, other things to relate to people with, maybe one of my clients is interested in Nepal or interested in, film photography or something else that I'm working on. And it kind of just builds more of a community than just having like a exchange service of paying you for this service and then never seeing you again. I think that's just like a weird way to do business.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's awesome. So I think we got to end this episode at some point. So thanks for sharing all of your experience with travel, because I think travel is like such an important thing that you can do to learn from, and everybody doesn't have the access or ability to do that. So I think it is a cool way to like be able to share the lessons that you've learned with other people who can listen to a free podcast. So thanks for being vulnerable and honest with your experiences and taking your time to come on and talk to us. And I guess we'll have to have you on another year and see where you're at.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on the podcast. I really appreciate it. It's been great having a conversation and sharing stories. And like you said, just being able to kind of share these experiences with other people or the photos with other people, or just, try and just relate, human to human in another culture. It's like, that's kind of the whole point of things, right? It's like, it's easy to kind of judge another culture or look down on somebody. But when you get to know them on a personal level, you're like, oh, they're just people just like us, like that's the whole point of everything, right?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for listening to Working Towards Our Purpose. If you liked today's episode and are interested in more, you can sign up for my Substack newsletter with the link in the show notes, where I share thoughts, tips, and ideas that I'm learning along my journey to help inspire you. The show was produced by Pleasant Podcast at pleasantpodcast.com.